Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's going to be one of those slow starts, but thanks for being here at the beginning of it. You haven't missed anything. You've just missed me saying hello. The doors are closed. We're ready to go. Hang on for a good ride. Welcome, everyone. I'm Theron Schmidt. I teach theatre here at King's College London, and it's a great privilege to get to introduce to you Gary Winters and Greg Whelan, who together for 15 years have been lone twin, working in a range of contexts with a huge variety of different kinds of communities and different kinds of projects. We're here mostly to talk about an extraordinary project of which clips are showing behind you, and for which the real thing stands just outside those front doors, the Boat Project. This was an extraordinary project that arose out of an extraordinary opportunity called Artists Taking the Lead, kind of an unprecedented thing that I doubt we're likely to see again in this country, in which a large amount of money was given to artists to decide what to do with it. There were 12 public commissions as part of what was at one time called the Cultural Olympiad, and later, because of the obvious reasons about not getting to use the word Olympics to refer to this thing that everyone calls Olympics, renamed the London 2012 Festival. And with this boat, Lone Twin have navigated quite treacherous waters, I think, waters of national and regional identity and of public art and of this complex brand management that is the Olympic game of things, and the national showmanship and showwomanship of the games, as well as their own remarkable commitment to inclusion and to experiences that are meaningful to participants and are not just empty gestures, and to the rigor of following a line of thought wherever it takes you. So this Artist Taking the Lead was quite an unlikely to be repeated opportunity in which there was an open call for proposals, and shortlisted artists were granted £5,000 to develop an idea, and then out of those, one project was granted £500,000 to bring that into fruition. Not nearly enough in this case, as I'm sure you'll say, but nevertheless a healthy start. And this allowed for thinking outside the constraints of the usual commission that we might be used to, and that I expect we'll continue to see in other contexts from time to time. Lone Twin was the one that was finally selected from the southeast region amongst proposals that included building a pier that extended a very long way from the southeast coast, in fact, all the way to France, so we could walk there, was one such proposal. Another was for a gallery, which would be located somewhere on the beach, so that at high tide it was completely underwater, and at full tide it was partially exposed. And then there was this strange proposal to make a boat out of wooden objects donated by members of the object and members of the public, and to have those stories that were associated with those objects to somehow be incorporated into this floatable object. It might be easy to place this kind of project within the social turn that has swept contemporary art over the last decade and a half, whether you think about that in terms of Bourriaud's relational aesthetics, and continues to have such prevalence in forms such as the currently exhibiting Tina Segal exhibition in the Turbine Hall of the Tate Modern, in which you might find yourself accosted by one of a large group of volunteers who want to tell you their life story. The social turn was criticized by theorist and curator Claire Bishop for valuing collaboration and participation above aesthetic challenge and rigor. She argued against the idea that a socially collaborative art project could be deemed a success if it works on the level of social intervention, even though it founders on the level of art. So she had quite a bone to pick with these kinds of projects. She tended to praise works that were characterized by discomfort and antagonism, in challenging our ideas about social identity and consensus. But I think one of the extraordinary things about Lone Twin's work is that it proceeds along a different axis from Bishop's remedy to this dilemma. It is not so much a social turn made by visual artists who want to explore dematerialized forms of relationship, but the opposite, what we might call a material turn, a pursuit of lines of thought through the materiality of our constructed lives, the lives that we make with our hands. Throughout their long history, which I'm sure they'll allude to, they've made practical explorations of fundamental ideas, finding the ways in which questions can be inhabited and made real, in which forms of thought become lived and breathed and labored and sweated, in which relationships and histories become embodied in artifacts and accumulated into the stuff we carry around us, whether we want to or not, and the ways in which those material objects themselves interact with each other and can be shaped and crafted into something new and extraordinary. And I think there's quite a fitting exemplary, perhaps kind of the crowning achievement of that sits right outside these doors in this exquisitely crafted racing yacht that is Collective Spirit, and also documented in the beautiful book that accompanies it, the Lone Twin Book Project, which I will call to your attention as being for sale in the back of the room after the lecture, after the presentation. So it's a great pleasure for us here at King's to have the boat Collective Spirit on display for the duration of this Arts and Humanities Festival, to have Greg Whelan here for some time as AHRC Research Fellow in the Department of English, and to have both Greg and Gary tonight to share with us their experience of working on this amazing project. So thanks so much for being here.
Cool. Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thanks, Helen. All right, brilliant. Thank you. I don't know what to add. Gary's going to fiddle with the visuals. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, the boat project. We'll give some background as to sort of where it came from in our work, why we sort of started to think about building a boat, and then the sort of through line of the project. We'll get into some detail about how we actually constructed the boat, because people are always very interested about that as well. There's probably time for questions. We'll try to be a bit shorter than it's planned, so we finished, because we're starting late, so we'll try and finish at the same time. But if you have questions as we go, just ask us. This will become increasingly more informal as the thing goes on. But there will be time at the end as well for questions if we can go quite quickly at points. So that's the first picture.
Yep. First image sort of comes from some way into the project. As you can see, the boat's already built. The wood's already been received. The boat's been shaped. This was on the 7th of May of this year, 2012. And coincidentally, that was exactly 12 years to the date that we'd had the idea for the boat project. The very beginning, sort of early ideas for the boat project, the little seeds were sown in a small town in Norway in May, the 7th of May 2000. This was the official launch in front of 1,000 or so people, made up of people who have donated wood, people from the local area, people who have travelled further afield to come and visit us, to see the boat being launched and named and blessed. It was this official marker of the build process being finished and being handed over to the relatively novice crew and captain to take her on a maiden voyage during the summer, during this celebratory summer of 2012. But we'll get back to this image a bit later on. We'll sort of start way back and move towards this.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Some of this has already been explained. Boat project, we're Lone Twin. It was funded by the Arts Council through Artists Taking the Lead, and was part of the London 2012 festival.
All right. So this picture was taken in 2000, so 12 years ago, by anybody's maths. And it's a picture from a series of performances that we were making. And we spent about 6 years making performances where we engaged directly with water. Prior to these water things, we were making what was called then, perhaps still, our site-specific performances, but sort of urban things. I think mainly because the festivals and the galleries, events and things tend to be in urban areas. But we sort of started on this, we sort of stopped that. We started on this research project, which became this long series of works, where we became very interested in rural context for making performance. I think because at the time, as an aside with it, I think because at the time, because we saw, we're making this urban work, and it was about sort of this contemporary world that a field or a wood isn't. But of course it is, isn't it? You know, I can stand in a field in 2012, and I can stand in the middle of Tokyo in 2012. They're both sort of amazingly contemporary, resonant spaces. But we were sort of making these works in urban areas. It was very, and there was a sort of big discourse at the time caught up around sort of non-places and, I don't know, psychogeography and those sorts of things. And we just suddenly realized that we wanted to go and be in the field. And in the field, we'd find things like rivers and streams, puddles, lakes, and then eventually seas. So we sort of came across water. And when we came across water, it was sort of allied with this moment of discovery when we read a child's encyclopedia. I don't remember where we were. Do you? No. I don't. But we read on a table in a kitchen in somebody's house. In America? Anyway. I read in this child's encyclopedia that it was an outline picture of the human body. And it was coloured in blue up to about here. And it said that we were mainly water as a thing that walks through the world and is in the world and, you know, sends emails and receives tweets, that we're mainly a liquid. And as we were sort of drawn to water in this group of performances that we were making, this sort of really helped us, and we started thinking about this body of water and other bodies of water. We were in this long series of performances where we were trying to merge the two. We'd, at the start of shows, we'd be in Chicago and we'd drink Lake Michigan, and then we'd get very hot during the performance under the theatre lights, and we'd sweat, and we'd say the lakes appearing on our faces, on our foreheads. Or we'd cry into rivers, or we'd run a long way or walk a long way to get to a river and then sweat into it. We did a long series of things where we'd get very, very, very hot and then throw our body weight. We'd get the audience actually go out of the theatre, and we'd get the audience to throw our body weight in water that we'd collected from the local source, be it river, sea, whatever. We'd throw it over us, but we'd spent the previous hour and a half becoming incredibly hot. If we were hot enough, if the air temperature was cool enough, the water would hit us and the water would start to evaporate on us in steam. We'd say we were making clouds and that we'd become the weather. So all of these things, very interested in what water was. But it put us on sort of the edge of water all the time. And we started to be commissioned sort of entirely to sort of engage with water. And doing that meant that we invariably sort of would end up in conversations with people, local people, people that we'd meet. We'd make shows actually constructed entirely from those meetings, stories that people were telling us about their day. They'd often see us sort of dressed up oddly, collecting water basically, and they'd see us, we'd often do it on a sort of repeating structure. So we might be walking past a cafe at the same point in an hour, you know, for like a week or something. And in the end they'd come out and say, what are you doing? And we'd say, well, we're collecting our body weight in water, of course, to throw over ourselves later on this evening. And we'd say, what are you doing? And he'd say, well, I work in this cafe. And then sometimes we'd invite those people to the shows and they'd tell their stories in the shows, or we'd sort of repeat them in some way. But we were quickly building these sort of narrative events from these meetings that we were having whilst engaging with water. And it was during all of those conversations that boats started to appear in the talk, in the conversation. And we'd find ourselves in places like Norway, which is where this project sort of started, doing a long performance there. And people, Norway's this great boat building land. You know, sort of everyone's building a boat, everyone's cousin's done one, everyone's dad's done one. It has this sort of real, real sort of presence in a way that it perhaps doesn't here anymore, but once definitely did in lots of communities. But we started thinking very seriously about building a boat, and then we were in Bermondsey, and we were making a project, and we were working on a street which was right by the Thames. And we thought we would do this performance on this street, and then, brilliantly, we'd have built these coracles. Do you know coracles? These little, small, sort of rural boats, really small, like you can put them on your back. They're pretty tiny, they're very light, and you make them with willow, but with twigs, really, not with planks or anything, and you make a bowl, and you sort of weave these, it's like a basket, you weave these willow bits together, and then you coated it in tar, and then you've got this great little boat that you can put on your back. And if you're the shepherd, you know, and you get up and you go to look for your sheep, and your sheep are on the other side of the river, it's not a problem because you've got your coracle on your back, although how the sheep get across the river, I don't know. But you've got the coracle on your back, and you can go across the thing, put it back on your back, and there you go. So these very quick and easy boats, and that's what we were going to make. And we were going to ask the people in that street if we could sort of forage around in their gardens for bits of twigs and wood that would help us make these boats, these 2 coracles. And we were very taken by the idea of building these sort of local boats as we saw them at that point. But this is about 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work also, as Greg mentioned, about these meetings and conversations with people, and very interested in hearing the kind of local gossip and hearsay, and those things sort of fed into our material for the performances, the reports, the dispatches, the accounts that we told to an audience assembled, this sort of local information connected to local people, maybe local objects. And this, as Greg said, it began as a theme or a line in some of the work we're making in the urban settings. So, for example, this piece Totem in 1998 in Colchester, where we dragged a telegraph pole across the town of Colchester, meeting people. It took us a week to drag this pole across the town. At the end of the journey, we made a performance, which was a storytelling performance about the things we'd found out about the town, a sort of very subjective history of the town. Similarly, other pieces we've made, this is in 2007 at the Barbican Centre. We were commissioned by the Barbican to make a piece that really went out into the whole estate of the Barbican, not just the art centre, but across the residential flats and the other buildings that are there, the church, the girls' school. And we walked on a spiral. We drew a spiral across a map of the Barbican estate. The Barbican, obviously a very designed environment, lots of right angles and dead ends and walkways. But we drew this very natural, meandering shape across the Barbican estate and attempted to walk it. As we walked, we collected objects, sometimes from the street, like we were beachcombing, and we'd mark on our map where we found things, what we thought they were. And also, we'd meet people. So here I'm talking to a resident who I think's come out, but she's been watching us from her flat and wondering what we're carrying. We're carrying the object on the left-hand side of the frame is all the stuff we've amassed so far. And this woman is talking to me, and she has brought me something to add to our kind of collection of things. This is the map when we started at the beginning of the week, the blue line we're trying to follow, and we've marked in red our route and the things we're finding, and that's our map at the end of the week, full of people and objects and stories.
The construction, that sort of ball of stuff, was put together in such a way that because we were trying to keep to this line, so the line would sort of go through people's homes and offices and, the sort of that whole estate, through very small spaces. The thing got really big, so we constructed it in such a way that we could deconstruct it relatively quickly. So wing nuts, just so we come up to like a small little alley, and that's where the line goes. So we take the whole thing apart, like, and then we'd sort of move it all through, and then on the other side, make it sort of big again and move on. So moving, but even that sort of movement actually would take us, the best part of 3 or 4 hours just to move sort of a couple of meters or so. So it's sort of labor intensive. And it's, as Gary was saying, you end up in these sort of endless conversations with people. The things on there become conversation points themselves. So people ask what that thing is, and we say, that's a key for an apartment in Manhattan. The person stayed in the apartment but never returned the key. So if you want that key, take it, find the apartment, Bob's your uncle. They become these sort of ways into talking and talking about then where that person lives, etc. So a sort of catalyst.
Yeah. And the pieces became populated by these people who had interacted and encountered us beyond just us two sort of doing these things. A couple of pictures now of another piece, just to demonstrate a sort of some pieces we've been making in recent years that we've called public projects. They're projects where we don't performing them, but we maybe collaborate with another arts professional and work with a community. Here in Nottingham, we were commissioned to make a dance piece, and we work with a choreographer and residents on this street in Sneinton in Nottingham. We just put posters up, put notices through people's letterboxes, got on the local radio and asked for volunteers for a dance project. We said we wanted to make a dance piece which was a portrait of their community, of their street, of the neighbours dancing together. So in the middle of the frame there is Angie. She works for the council, and she's got her arms outstretched, and she's describing in dance and gesture a new bathroom mirror that had been recently fitted. We went to work with Angie at her house and talk about her life and develop a dance portrait of Angie. And we noticed there was lots of DIY going on, and she was very proud of this new bathroom mirror that had been fitted, where some sort of sensor, you put your arms out and all the lights come on in the bathroom, and she really was very proud of this. So there's Angie dancing about that and telling her neighbours and the audience from the Not Dance Festival about that. Similarly, here's Leo. He also works for the council in Islington, funnily enough, another council worker. He's dancing in front of Sadler's Wells about his journey into work. I think he's talking about he wears his headphones on his way to work. So here Leo's dancing about his life and presenting a portrait of himself in dance. Just to kind of go into where Greg was talking about a series of works engaged with water and the beginnings of the boat project. Here's a map that we made for the performance in Norway back in 2000. You see the date there, 7th of May at the top. It was an 18-hour walking performance across 2 bridges in the town of Kongsvinger. And during that time, we suggested, that's a sort of timeline across the top, this sort of ongoing, repetitive action of walking backwards and forwards on the bridges. And below, this sort of messy existence of all these things that we suggested that would be happening during that 18.5-hour time frame. They're little snippets of events that we knew would be happening in the town, stories we've heard from the town from talking to local people, and things we'd imagined in our own heads. It's in Norwegian, you might have noticed. It was translated into Norwegian. And there is one sort of time, I don't know how I get there. There is a timeline. Use something.
You could use a sort of microphone like Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, this one over here. But the one that says the sort of numeric I.
Oh, yes.
You see it? My finger is there. That says build a boat. There's one a little bit further away along to launch the boat. And further away, right on the right-hand side, 3 is sail the boat around the world. So that was a very early suggestion that we might build a boat. And then we took it forward to this residency in Bermondsey where we're going to make Coracles. That never happened. We kept the idea in our heads, and then the artist taking the lead commissions were announced. So this idea sort of sat with us for many years, but the basic premise, the basic concept and idea of building a boat, launching it and sailing it was there in 2000. So that was in the summer of 2000. Also in the summer of 2000, the Olympics were happening in Sydney, and the guy at the front is called Mark Cavell, and his friend Ian Walker's behind him, and they've just won silver medal for Team GB in the star class. There they are on the. Actually, I quite like this.
This is nice.
Right, those, us two, those two, those two.
Watch
Us two.
Yeah. See, flowers. Look,
flowers.
flowers. That's the level we're working at. We spend ages arranging slideshows.
That's from a piece we made in 2003.
Yeah.
So, 10 years later, those 2 worlds met. Greg and myself and Mark in the empty boat shed in Emsworth that we leased to build the boat in. As was mentioned, we made a feasibility study. We was given £5,000 to make a feasibility study to see how this project would happen. During that period, we met Mark. He was kind of enlivened by the idea. It was just a phone call that he received. And I think because of his Olympic connection, and maybe because he also says he's a problem solver, he really wanted to get involved in the project and see how he could make this boat, this yacht, from all these wooden objects.
Mark was also the only boat builder that we spoke to that said yes, it could be done. Yeah. So we went with Mark. Didn't go with Steve or Dave, who said no. Went with Mark.
I remember standing with Mark in the boat shed when it was empty, when we were going to start the project, launch the project in a month or so, and he was, I think, a little bit anxious that we wouldn't get wood, how would we meet people? How do we get word out? How do we find the wood? How do we find people who would want to get involved in this project for him? It was still a little bit alien to him, I think, and he was a little bit worried that we really wanted to really should get our finger out and kind of find how to get the wood and find the right wood for the boat. So we made posters and got on local radio, local newspapers to spread the word of wanting wooden objects. We suggested that the wood that we'd like to receive maybe was wood that was objects that were quite difficult to give away. Maybe they were quite precious, quite valuable, quite sentimental, not necessarily scrap wood in a sort of recycling project where you might get stuff that was going to be trashed and that was given and we turned it into a boat. We maybe wanted objects that had meaning for that person and definitely had a story. We asked that people arrive with their objects, would donate it to the project, hand it over, and they would tell us the story about it. They would sort of reveal this little bit of biography, this little part of their life, as people had revealed these little moments in their life in previous projects. That all these objects came with a history to that person. We set up in art centres and town squares and pubs where we could to go out on donation days around the southeast region. Here we are in Barford St Michael, a little village in Oxfordshire, set up in the pub for the day, and even Dylan the dog gave us something that day. But the basic sort of moment of donation was that we would record the conversation, the story, on a dictaphone. Here's a gentleman in Hastings bringing a walking stick that he had brought for his mother. His mother had now passed away, and when they were clearing the house, there was various objects, and he kept one of her walking sticks, and he remembers it was a stick that he'd bought for her, and now he'd been using it to walk along the coast.
This is a sort of repeating scene of donation. People coming and us meeting them and talking to them, taking their portrait and interviewing them. And if I think about it as a show, this is the sort of long middle section where this scene just keeps happening and happening and happening hundreds of times, 1,200 times, in fact, just a little over 1,200 times. And we receive this sort of overwhelming array of objects, from things that are sort of quite benign, but the story's charged, to artifacts of sort of national and international importance, parts of the space station, parts of very famous other boats, all sorts of things sort of start coming through the door that are given in this sort of gesture of absolute sort of generosity by the giver, who is handing over, especially in the early days before the project had sort of, the project sort of, you know, gained a profile a little way in, but in the early days it was just, you know, turn up to this shed at the end of this lane and give over this thing that you really like to these guys that say they're building a boat, you know. So a sort of massive act of trust in a way. We'll talk through just a few of these.
Yeah. So this is a woman called Pippa Blake, and she's the widow of Sir Peter Blake, who's a famous New Zealand sailor. This is a statue they both, when they stopped in Easter Island on for a short stop on the way back from New Zealand to the UK. They built two of these little statues, this little statue from Easter Island, and she gave one, and she's keeping the other one. This is Toni Freeman, and he's brought us a piece of wood. You can see it's got some writing on it. It was part of a boat called Morning Cloud, which belonged to Ted Heath, the ex-Prime Minister, which found off of Brighton and broke up, and he salvaged this piece of wood from the beach and kept it and then brought it along to us. This is a small shaving from a guitar, it's the size of my fingernail, from a guitar that Jimi Hendrix played, it's a Matis guitar. And a gentleman called Keith in Surrey Heath brought us this. He came along with his wife for a donation day without it. I don't think he really intended. His wife was donating something, and then he sort of saw what people had given, the array of objects, the size of objects, the different scales of things. And he went home and came back an hour later with this framed portrait of Jimi Hendrix and sort of broke it open and pulled out the little box and gave us a shaving, and I had to find a little box to put it in. It gave us a quarter of his collection. It's a woman called Helen, and she brought us a planter that her brother had made, her late brother had made as an exam piece. And she's not married, and it's just her and her father really left in her family. and they discussed what object to bring along, and they decided to bring this piece along of her brother's, because she has no children, so she said that when they both die, then there's no one to give it to. So it sort of marks, I guess, a kind of strand of some of the donations that mark people's lives. The boat became this vessel that received these objects that mark lives. These are members from 3 generations of the Webb family. They live in Arundel, and they're holding a piece of wood, a sort of spindle, like a long piece of wood, and a member of each generation has slept in a wooden cot that piece of wood comes from. So dad, son, and the little boy slept in that cot. This is Betty with her son and daughter-in-law, and she's holding a piece of a wardrobe that was built up in Scotland, in Glasgow, for a large house for the family. And as the family have migrated south in the country and on the island, so has the wardrobe. It's moved between houses, it's been broken up, it's been changed and modified, and this is the last piece remaining. As the houses got smaller, then the wardrobe had to get smaller, and this is the last piece of the wardrobe.
We sort of realised after a while that, you know, this sort of act of generosity, actually they're giving these things away in some respect for them to be kept safe, because we'd indexed them and we'd archived them. We told everybody we're making this book. In the book is the portrait of every donor and the story, the transcription of the interview. So actually these things that would perhaps otherwise drift away from the sort of heart of something could be kept, I think. I think that became part of the sort of motivation for people, that we would, we would keep them, even though we take a saw to them and change them completely. Something of them remains, something stays. This is, so you sort of set up, and this is on a donation day in Chichester, and you've got this sort of tent and people are coming in, and it's a wooden spoon from a great holiday, and really lovely sort of stories. And all of a sudden, Bunty and Shirley rock up with these 2 crates and tell this sort of incredible story, which I'll paraphrase now. And there are many instances of this sort of thing happening, where it's this whole other history, whole other sort of narrative. Basically, when France fell to Germany in the war, Churchill thinks the same might happen here, instructs the Bank of England to move all the physical worth of the country out of the country. Take the gold, the bonds, the checks, the securities, all of those things, and take them out. Bunty and Shirley's father worked for the Bank of England and was commissioned to do that, to run that operation. He had 2,000 of these crates made. He made these crazy calculations of how many gold bars could be put in each, how much would be safe to put on a boat in terms of weight. He got 2 boats, only 2. I mean, I'd sort of spread it on lots of boats, but it's not my job, wasn't my job, and never will be my job. So he gets 2 boats, and they fill all this stuff on. Nobody talking. This was a great detail. Bunty and Shirley were saying that nobody talks. The guys that are loading the boats up, no one says what's in there. This is absolute secrecy around the operation. All this worth, the physical worth of this country, on 2 boats gets taken to Canada, to Montreal. Bunty and Shirley follow with the mother in a 3rd boat. Bunty and Shirley, mum and dad, stay with this sort of economic mapping of the country, this sort of physical manifestation of the worth of the country, stay with it for the war finishes, they bring it back. No record of this. So the Bank of England, no history of this, not in other sort of wartime histories. Bunty and Shirley seem entirely credible to me. The boxes are stamped with Bank of England stamps, and they've got all this documentation, the workings out the dad made. He was slightly off. The boat with the gold on, the steel girders were bent by the weight of the gold, but the gold got there, and we're all here to enjoy that story in this sort of shape of the country. But just this sort of amazing thing suddenly happens, and they give these the only 2 crates they have left. They did have more, but they have 1 each, and then they hand them to us, tell the story, turn around, get in the car, and go.
This is Eric, and he is wearing a scarf with a little wooden woggle on it, that you might be able to see. And he was a Boy Scout in 1948, and he sat around the trackside of the opening ceremony of the London 1948 Olympic Games. And he made the woggle on his scarf, especially for that day. He took his cousin Gordon's pipe and he cut the top off. I think he told Gordon about that. He put a little compass in it, which he said he never worked, but he had it in there anyway. And he put it on his scarf and walked to Wembley Stadium where he lived, and then went to the opening ceremony, and then went to camp. So he never saw any of the games. He was just there for the opening ceremony, and he opened a basket of homing pigeons, which there was 100 scouts, each with a basket of homing pigeons for the elaborate opening ceremony of the Olympic Games.
Danny Boyle directed.
Yeah. And he's kept the woggle, of course, all that time, and he brought it along to us. Eric's now passed away, sadly, earlier on this year, but his family came to the launch and were really thrilled and overwhelmed that his woggle sits on the end of the tiller of the boat, a very important part of the boat, and his woggle is there on the end. Last one of these stories, us two, and we're holding a broken paddle from a Coracle race meeting that we went to in Wales in 2001. So after we had the idea for the boat project, started thinking about making coracles, we went to a race meeting in Wales to find out about coracles and meet coracle makers. And we got there a bit late, and we just sort of saw the last race, and the gentleman who won the last race broke his paddle in the efforts to get across the line and win it. But he broke his paddle, his handmade paddle. We got talking to him about making coracles, and he gave us the paddle as a little gift, a little souvenir. It was useless to him now. He wouldn't repair it, he'd just make a new one. So he handed it over to us, and 10 years later, we handed it over to the boat project. So, small smattering of stories there. As Greg said, 1,221 numbered lots were assigned to donations we received. There was individuals, couples, families, groups, school classes came down, each donating wood. Some donations, some lots were single items, some were multiple items. So there was about 2,000 actual objects that we received. They each were numbered with a little raffle ticket. When we reached the 1,000 mark in the raffle ticket book, we moved on to a new raffle ticket book. We started from one again.
Very smart.
That's what you do. Of course, it has its problems later on, but I'll get onto that. Yeah, a whole range of objects received.
Sort of overwhelming amount of stuff. We had 2 days where we did stock takes, like in a shop, when you work out what you've got. This is actually about halfway through collecting, and this is a small amount of the sort of sea of things that were brought to us. We lived in fear of losing a piece. You know, you receive this thing. It's very important, but it might be tiny, or it might be something that's in 11 parts, and you know, losing just one of them sort of has some sort of impact on what they are as a collection. So we were endlessly checking numbers, we had this sort of database, we had all these sort of systems of trying to make sure that we knew what the thing was, and we knew where it was, and we knew whether it had been moved from one bench to another bench, and we knew where it was starting to be put on the boat. So we told people as they made their donations that once the boat's built, come back in a year and we'll show you where your piece is. We'll show you where that crate is and where the little Easter Island man is. We'll show you where the woggle is. Just come back in a year. So we were very, very keen. And Mark was too, the boat builder, very, very keen on tracking all of these objects. But it created a huge amount of work, which in a way perhaps we didn't see coming. But it was, you know, the devil's in the detail, and there were, you know, thousands of little devils.
So there we're breaking down some of the objects and flat packing them just for space for storing them in the shed, all to go to make a boat. Just to say also, we were also looking for a crew last summer. Whilst we were collecting wood, donations were still coming in, the build process on the boat had started. We also put the call out for crew members. We wanted members of the public to be nominated by friends and family. Maybe they're people who have never sailed before, have some experience of sailing, but we asked that the nominations were for people who they felt would benefit from the experience of the Maiden Voyage in the summer of 2012. So we got hundreds of applications coming in from all over the region and beyond, and we interviewed people and selected these 7 people. Some of them didn't know they'd been nominated, others have been told, so they were just sort of turned up at this thing or just suddenly got a phone call. But they came from different parts of the region, different experiences of sailing and reasons why it was a good reason to put them on the boat. Just to move on swiftly to the technical side of things. So when we found Mark, he brought with him the sort of experience in the sailing world and the boat building world. And he employed a designer, an architect called Simon Rogers. And Simon usually designs these big, around the world, sort of 60-foot ocean-going yachts that go in all the races. And we had early conversations with Simon about what kind of boats we would build.
Because, of course, you build anything, it sort of has, aesthetics and sort of resonances to things. Like you build a house, but if it's like a mock Tudor house, it sort of means something. If it's a modernist thing, it means something. It echoes something. It has a time, a place, a history, a geography, a nationality. Same with boats, So we kept saying we want to build a boat, and we met these guys who are designers, boat builder, and they're like, well, what sort of boat do you want to build? And you could point to a boat in the magazine and say, that's a nice boat. And they'd say, yeah, but that's a French boat, and that would have been built, say, in the 1950s, very popular. Why would we build that boat? So I don't know what boat we'd build. And then slowly through sort of discussion with those guys, we realized that we decided that we'd build a sort of boat for today. We'd build a boat for 2012, meaning that it would be a modern boat, that if you, in 100 years' time, you look back at this boat, you could place it, you could give it its geography, you could give it its time. So we went with this suggestion that it would actually be a very, it's a racing boat. It's effectively a big dinghy. If you watch the Olympics and they're sailing and they're in those really small things and they're leaning out the side when the boat heels up, when the boat sort of goes up on its side, it's basically just a really big one of those. So it's like a sports car. It's sort of stripped, it's not like a family saloon. It's sort of stripped back. And it's incredibly fast. Its lines are incredibly modern, the way, I don't know if anybody knows boats, other than this and a little bit of other stuff, I don't at all. But I do know now that this looks like a very, very contemporary boat. It's like sort of the iPhone 5, it looks like it should for now. Yeah.
And things like the design of the open back, I don't know if you've seen the boat outside, but it doesn't have a sort of back on it, a transom in traditional fashion, but that's because it's a very wet boat, it's very low in the water, and the waves come over the top. So the idea is that the water just flows out of the boat. People often think it's not finished. They were going to use modern boat building construction methods. The Goujon brothers came up with the construction method using epoxy resin in the 70s. So there's a guidebook on how to use epoxy resin. Mark made us using epoxy resin and various bits of wood from his sort of wood bin at home. He made us a little test panel to show us, to demonstrate what the boat would look like. And when we went out on donation days with our design of the boat, just a line drawing of the shape of the boat, we also took this and suggested that this is what might fill in the sort of shape of the boat using the objects we were collecting. So West System epoxy resin is what the builders used. A little kind of flicker book through now of shots from the shed. So this is where those sort of ribs are the shape of the hull, and that's a mould, a block they're going to build the hull over.
So that's upside down.
Yeah.
That's MDF, those things going this way, they're MDF formers, laser cut, really precision cut, to give us the mould that we build over. We then use this wood that isn't donated, but we were very keen right from the start that this boat would be like proper. It'd be like a real thing. It wouldn't just be a sort of art project that falls apart and becomes about sort of failure and depth and sinking. It would be an art project that was about the opposite of those things. And so we made sort of decisions along the way. And what we did here, it made this very beautiful shape. We made a very thin, super thin cedar shell, much thinner than you'd normally build. So it looks like a finished boat, but it isn't. You can put your fist through it. It's very sort of fragile at this point. It's the donations that strengthen the boat and give it its form and its sort of seaworthiness. But we make this shell. It takes us about 3 months.
Took about 3 months, yeah. You have to turn it over. They pop out the formers, and this sort of shell is left with a strip plank of cedar wood, and it's fiberglassed inside to make it a really solid foundation to build on. And then they start to fit out. I think it's Harry laying in there, one of the volunteers from the shed. He's starting to work on the hog, which is the spine of the boat. They put the cassettes in for the the rudder and the keel, and he's starting to use donated wood. So where we got wood that was large, sort of hefty bits of wood, we could use them structurally. So the spine of the boat is made from donated objects.
One of the things you'll see as the slides go on, and lots of them, is that, you know, there's Mark, the main boat builder, and then sort of other people, and this sort of army of volunteers start to materialize around the project. We ended up with about 120 people working on a rotor in the shed, entirely a volunteer sort of task force. Without them, we would not have completed the boat. We became entirely dependent upon the generosity of people with their time. Some of them have never been involved in anything like this before, so they would sort of help out in the shed in all sorts of ways. Other people came to us, retired cabinet makers, shop fitters, carpenters, those sorts of things, all sorts of people. And then we also had this sort of huge job archiving the project, stock taking, like I was saying, so another team of volunteers looking after that side of things. So it became this sort of vast community of people giving their time to the project. Here's a guy, this is towards the boat sort of slightly getting towards being completed, and he's spraying the outside of it. I think we had 14 sprays. You can spray every, what was it? Anybody remember? Like, you spray every like 5 hours or something. And the epoxy at this point is warm, and the shed's in a big bag, and it floats up into the air, and then when it cools, it sinks back down and clings to the boat, so you get this sort of perfect finish. But you have to wear a sort of spacesuit to be in there.
Shots of some of the volunteers, as Greg was saying. This is Keith. Often people were started as people who donated wood, and then found out that they could volunteer and realised they had a day a week or a day a fortnight to come down to the shed. And so there's Keith helping out. There's Harry inside the cabin. All hands on deck. The last few weeks of getting the boat ready. There's just a sort of regular day at the shed. All these people coming in and helping. As we said, this large stock-taking project to really work out what we'd do with all these objects and how we'd use them. The multiple objects in various conditions, so things with nails in, things with woodworm, things with paint on, freshly green wood just cut from a tree with a leaf still on it. How do you use that? Tiny objects, all sorted into boxes. You see it says topsides on there, so we were sorting where it went on the boat. We prepared all the objects for the topsides, which you may have seen on the boat outside. So all these objects have had a slice taken through them, like a sort of CAT scan, like a sort of cross-section. So some transform to look a different shape, depending on how they cut it. Others retain their profile. And the long, painstaking job and patient job of the boat builders working along, tacking things up, cutting things on the bench. Suddenly one piece becomes about 20 pieces. There's Jess and Ian moving along, always referring to the sort of page-based archive to find out what they were working with at any given time. And then the archiving team taking note of all the numbers. So in our book we've got a map and a reference of where everything is on the boat. So when all the stickers came off and the first layer of varnish went on, these lovely grains and all these curious sort of groupings could be seen. Here the boat builders have placed 5 steps from the Arundel Lido in the kind of ascension up the boat, and a foot, a clog and a wooden prosthetic foot inside the clog stepping on it. Long strips were made from objects to make the cuddy roof. A section of hollow mast from a Thames aerator was used to make Olympic rings. Lolly sticks were extended up the mast.
They have all the jokes are showing, you know. So if you're clinging on in a gale and everything's lost, there's at least something to lighten the mood.
And there's Eric's woggle with the little mouse peeking out the edge. We took it to the London Boat Show, and that was the first sort of public moment where people could see what the project was about. They'd read about it in magazines, heard things, seen reports on the news or on the radio, and I think people were, as Greg was saying about it being a very modern shape, people were slightly wrong-footed, thinking that it would be this crazy kind of pirate ship with things sticking out of it and looking like it's completely kind of, unsaleable.
This is when the boat sort of became public, and we had a sense as we were making it. We didn't realise actually when we started working with Mark, the boat builder, we'd sort of gone into this marine world at a certain level. We realised only a little way into the project that he was sort of a very, very well-known person in that world. It was a little like deciding that you might write 2 songs and then you do it with Bono, and you're walking through sort of those. We go to the boat show with Mark, and he's a famous person in that sort of world, and it meant, so was the boat designer actually. So it meant that once we'd sort of finished it and got it into the public space, especially into these sort of boaty worlds, which we don't have any sort of relationship to at that point, suddenly it's like the most famous boat in the world, and the stories, and we're doing interviews in. Phone things in Canada, Africa, India, everywhere. And boats have this curious thing where despite their, who owns them, where they come from, it's like they're their own thing in the world. They get a sort of notoriety. They leave you almost entirely. It's a really curious sort of thing, but they become something themselves, and this is the beginning of that really. At the boat show.
So this is the other members of Lone Twin, or core members, Gwen and Catherine, our producers, making the final checks before the book's printed. We wanted the book to be at the launch. She leaves the shed for the first time. We step the mast, go for a test sail to make sure everything's okay for the launch. And then 7th of May was the public launch. She was named Collective Spirits. That was, again, we ran a poll on the website for people to vote for a name. We had a short list of 10 names. The name Collective Spirit was suggested to us by Peter Goss, who's a famous sailor. And actually an early inspiration of the project, a large catamaran that he built in the late 90s down in Devon, where it became a big part of the community in Totnes, people helping on the project and contributing both financially and with labour. And then people's relationships to that boat when it was launched, when it went away, that people really felt a connection to it.
Alan Reed's in that photograph somewhere. I would never point him out. The boat, there we are.
Happy?
Very happy. That's happy, isn't it? That's from donating. In fact, the top of that, Gary's holding a cabinet. At the top of the cabinet, the sort of ornate bit at the top is the first donation that we got. It's donation number 1. Ern, one of the volunteers, who was a cabinet maker and shop fitter in a previous life, made this cabinet as one of his projects, and the book fits in there. The book, which is this index to the boat. So the book lives on the boat. And that's what we're proudly and happily holding there with the crew all trained up, kitted up. Mark there's daughter, Emily, who named the boat for us, having a swig. And here we are with the beginning of the voyage. We're sort of slightly eating into our allotted time, but Gary's done that, so it means it's all right.
It's 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, yeah. So Mike there in the black becomes, we hire him as boat captain, skipper, and he's going to take the crew around on this, what we call the Maiden Voyage. The Maiden Voyage is this thing where the boat sails around the southeast coast, and when it comes into port, there's a big sort of cultural event around it in each play. Sometimes modest little things like fetes as we go into Folkestone, sometimes as we go into Portsmouth, thousands and thousands of people. So things of varying sizes. But by now, actually, a lot of the people, there he is, a lot of the people know the boat. So it sort of has its own audience, its own crowd. It's blessed everywhere. That was the Bishop of Horsham in Brighton blessing the boat. You couldn't keep them away. Everybody with a stick wants to bless a boat. This is the crowd. That's the crowd at Portsmouth. There was a 600-strong choir singing the boat in. We worked with lots of partners, hundreds of partners, making the voyage happen. And we gave them a sort of shape, and we told them about customs of arrivals and departures for boats, the culture of song around boats, which we'll talk about in a little bit in regard to what happens next. All sorts of crazy things happened. Look, shanty singers in Hastings in the rain. Oh yes, and John Lamb singing in Hastings. So we ran a little way through the project. We ran a commission for an artist to be on the boat, and we trained the artist, so the artist would sail with the crew. We wanted an artist to generate what we called the ship's log. So you know, a normal ship's log, it's the ledger that accounts for the journey, the wind, the wave, the tides, the direction, all of that sort of stuff. But we wanted to make a ship's log that sort of expanded that idea of it, and we commissioned 30 Pounds of Bones, Johnny Lamb, to make this project which he'll talk about, and we'll get to hear that after our talk. There'll be a short change, and then the band will play. But this sort of quite amazing, I think, project where Johnny writes a song for every leg of the voyage. So he's on the boat, he's sailing the boat with the crew. He writes a song for the Hailing Island to Brighton leg. He arrives in Brighton, he teaches that song, that's the first song, teaches it to musicians there. And in fact, that constellation of musicians who will join Johnny tonight. And then they play that song as a gig. And then the next town, there's two songs. There's a song from Brighton and there's the new song. New musicians, teach them the set quite quickly, only two songs then, but it grows and it grows and it grows. Different bands in every location. The songs about the legs of the voyage. And what we especially liked about this, and which was the sort of pragmatism of it. I think we realised when you build a boat, you say you're building a boat, it's very clean, straightforward ideas. People generally know what a boat is in the same way that people generally know what a song is or what a night out in a pub is. And we've made lots of performances over the years that in a way seek to sort of mirror quite everyday forms of gatherings, gigs, I don't know, comedy, bands, all of that sort of stuff. And somehow the sort of straight-aheadness of these forms, a boat, song, incredibly simple. I think that went a ways to this sort of huge audience, to put it simply, that attach themselves to the project.
Getting the response from various places en route here in Folkestone. All sorts of projects, community projects, arts projects, visiting schools. They made a large sail for us in Margate.
Bonkers.
It was craned into a shopping centre in Milton Keynes, which was the last port of call. And that's the last slide. It's a professional photograph taken from one of the sailing mags, and so across the whole thing, that world, the sort of sailing world, has really embraced the project, as Greg was saying, like at the boat show, with the calibre of people, the collaborators we had. So it's been featured and reviewed as a new boat in all the sort of boating and yachting magazines. So for it to kind of go into that world and not always sort of sit in our world, the arts world, it's kind of quite successful for us. And I think that's in its future, in the legacy stage of the project, to use an Olympic term. It's going to have a sailing life, and it's going to train people to sail, and people get experience of sailing this particular kind of boat, and also appear at arts festivals and be a sort of catalyst or inspiration for other arts projects to happen around it, or a residency space, or other arts projects which pick up the themes and ideas in the project.
Just a sort of final comment really from us, that the boat's about it's about 2 tons, weighs about 2 tons. It's a really heavy thing. A lot of that's the keel. It's got this great big lead keel, the thing that sort of drops down under the boat and keeps the boat upright. But it's very heavy. Where it is in the quad out there is actually the roof it's also the floor for us to stand on, but it's a roof. And so we have to sort of work out, can you put the boat there, because the boat's very heavy. And there's weight sort of all around the boat, I think. The boat carries a lot of the donations, memorials, basically. There's hundreds of them which mark the passing of life in sort of all sorts of forms. And then there's this sort of massive amount of sort of history there, this sort of you know, Matt Shirley and Bunty with the crates. There's all sorts of things. There's a lot of the war, actually. A huge amount of the Second World War in the boat. The Ark Royal, the decommissioned, you know, big naval ships in the boat, as are other naval ships. Nelson's boat, the Victory. We have a long plank from the Victory, which forms the hog of the boat, the main spine of the boats from the Victory. So there's this sort of weight. And it sits for us in this shed, static. It gets turned about 6 months in, and then it sits there for another year as this big, heavy object. And then, and we were showing the video as you were sitting down, the test sail video was playing on loop as you were coming in. And then they put the boat in the water for a test sail. Mark does this quite privately. He doesn't even want us to be there. He just wants to stick it in with his team and make sure that it's a boat and not just, you know, an art project. But anyway, it's a boat. Mark's very happy with it. We then, the next day, go down to this other marina where the boat is, and we go out on a little rib, you know, on a little motorboat thing, to where the boat's been, where Mark's trialling the boat. And we sort of sail up there. We can't see the boat. And suddenly, this silent, incredibly light, massive bird flies past, just like this, incredibly fast. And it's suddenly the lightest thing. It sort of skips around on the water. As a boat, it performs sort of extraordinarily. Mark and Simon, the designer and builder, spoke about the sort of last act of the piece, of the show, being incredibly thrilling right from the start. They spoke about speed and light and movement, and that it would be thrilling to be on the boat. It is, actually. It's a very, very fast boat. Johnny will sort of talk all about that later. But anyway, suddenly on water, it's light. It's all about light and wind. It reflects the light and all of those things, but it becomes this light thing. There's something sort of brilliant in that. That moment was sort of shocking, in a way, that this thing, you know, imagine this room suddenly, you know, flying away. It was sort of equivalent to that, sort of amazing. Still is when you see her on the water, or if you're on her, it becomes this sort of incredible thing. And that's just, I mean, that's the boatness of it, but it has sort of lightness to it, which surprised us, I think. So I think we should shut up. Other questions? Any questions?
Did you turn any objects away?
Say again?
Did you turn any objects?
Did we turn any objects away? Yeah.
One quick, please.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to say that?
Did you turn any objects away?
It's a very good question. Very well said.
I'm waiting the whole time.
To do that. Well, you've done it now. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, maybe 3 or 4. People brought things that they thought were wood, but not wood. So chipboard, MDF. So stuff that sort of was once wood in some part of its life, but actually is a sort of industrial cardboard that once we put in the boat and put resin on, just sort of blisters and explodes. But only maybe 3 or 4 of those things. Yeah.
As long as it was wood, we wouldn't return anything. If the condition, say there was green stuff freshly cut that morning, or 4,000-year-old bog oak that was this kind of dark, kind of bizarre-looking object that was, yeah, you didn't know if it would crumble in your hand or what. But yeah.
Do it.
Okay.
Get it.
You could
get in there.
You cut like very thin slices to make the objects, right? So I suppose that actually like 90% of the object wasn't used.
Yeah.
What did you do with the rest, and how did it feel, whatever you did? I wish I don't know.
How did it feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. To discard bits of things. Yes. This was a big sort of thing around the project right from the beginning, where we wanted a lot of people to get stuff on the boat, and that meant taking parts of stuff, you know, because we could have stopped the donation process after about a month and build a boat of things in their entirety, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to sort of have a sort of, you know, a sort of multiplicity of things on there. What we did was, as we were sawing things right from the beginning, the guys saved the sawdust in bin bags. We filled hundreds of them. Stuff that was left, we chipped down, and from that we made paper. We have reams and reams and reams of paper. The first thing we've done with the paper was we've made these bookmarks that say "I am a boat" on the front, that go with the book. There's a list of potential things that are in this bookmark. Huge array of things that could be in that bookmark. So we have paper and we have a lot of it, and we will look perhaps for other projects that might like to use it, at some point. Yeah, we made paper. Maybe we should stop there, unless there's one. No, I think we should stop there because time is slipping away. Yes, okay, so there's a sort of break now, then the band set up. The band are absolutely fantastic. You've read about it in the program, but this constellation of musicians are very, very special. You may have seen them in their other bands and all of that sort of stuff, so stick around and see them. It's very, very beautiful stuff. I think the drinky thing's happening still. Is that right? Yes, so there's drinks upstairs, so we could do that, and then we can come back down. Is that right?
If you do have outstanding questions,
Yeah.
Of course you can book individual or group
Yes.
bookings to see the boat over the next 2 weeks. That's right, dear?
Yep.
Yep.
It's the middle of next week, yep.
You can buy the book, which has probably lots of answers to questions that you have.
Yes,
and it's full of detail, and I suppose you'll be around for the drinks.
Yeah, we're around. Yeah.
So please join me
Thank you,
in
everyone.
thanking Greg Wheeler and Gary Linden.